it really opened up a whole other avenue when it comes to sort of, again, what it means to be human.
On this week's All Walks podcast, we are delighted to be joined by psychotherapist Alan McInerney.
Before phones, there was, as you said, it was more visible, and at least there was a safe place.
This is a fascinating story about an individual who found psychotherapy and psychology, has worked on it, studied it, crafted it, and now he lives by it.
Because this is something that's often missed. When I say communication to people, they think, oh, just like talking, was that communicating? Communicating is more about letting someone know what's going on for you.
So without any further ado, here's Alan McInerney.
The All Walks podcast is now in your ear.
Go live! Well, we're here in the beautiful Vico rooms at the Queen's in Dalkey, and I'm absolutely delighted to have psychotherapist and psychologist Alan McInerney on the seats across from me. How are you, Alan? How are you?
Great. Thanks a million, and thanks very much for having me on. Really excited to be here. I'm a little bit nervous too.
Yeah, you're nervous because knowing you, this is probably the opposite of what you do. You know, you're somebody who's always gone about your business with limited fuss, but I had to get you on because of your story. I think it's fascinating, and I love the area that you're now essentially putting in all your energy. You're emotionally attached to this role.
I really am. It wasn't what I first set out to do, but now that I've fallen into it these last few years, just all my passion is towards this now. Is this whole area of psychotherapy, psychology, human behavior, helping people, supporting people. And how I got to this place, I suppose, has come from my own, experiences, and so many questions I've had over the years. They've just developed more and more around, why am I doing things a certain way? Why am I behaving a certain way? You know, so there's always a huge why for me. I always want to try and understand behavior. So there's always the surface answer or content, and then beneath that, then there's the why. And that's where you'll find me hanging out, because I'm just so curious. And funnily enough, the more answers I get, then the more curious I become. But I think that's the way it is for the entire psychotherapy, human development, mental well-being. The whole area is just, it's so vast. It really is.
And there's so many people now who are more and more interested and open to pick up a phone and to ring someone and say, hey, look, I'd love a chat. I want to get either things off my chest, or there's behaviors that they can't get away from, and they need guidance, and they need somebody to help talk them through the reasonings behind their actions. And that's essentially where you come in, right?
For sure. And you're right. I think there's an increase now. Thankfully, there's an increase, because there wasn't always. And when I first sort of went to therapy myself, we're going back, sort of 17 years now, when I first set foot in a therapy room. And even at that time, there was still this idea that, are you doing that? Like, I didn't tell people. I kept it to myself. I wasn't sure if it was okay or not okay. So it was kind of a new thing. Yeah. It's changed. It's changed a lot in the last couple of years. I find now, for me in my own practice, there's a lot more males coming in, for example, which is great to see, because that wasn't always the case. Yeah. I think traditionally, that it'd be more difficult for males to sort of put their hands up and say, oh, look, there's something going on at the moment. I'm struggling now, and really, I can't make my way through this. It's hard for me to be vulnerable. And I suppose, when you grow up too, we absorb so many of the messages that are in the culture and society at the time. And I think, certainly for me growing up, the messages were, it's not okay to be vulnerable. It's not okay to be weak. Stop crying. Stop acting like a girl. Build a bridge, get over it. These messages. And you internalize all of those. So you think, okay, I better not show emotion. I better not be weak or be vulnerable in front of other people. And that's the wrong message, because I think what happens then is we hold all this stuff in. We don't have anywhere we can let it out, because it doesn't feel safe to let it out. But you know what? It'll find its way out somehow, and usually that can have negative impact on those around us.
You're nearby. You're up in Enniskerry at the moment?
So I live in Enniskerry. I've been living there with my wife and my daughter, who's 11. We moved in there around 2008. And I'm working down in Greystones. That's where I have my private practice as a psychotherapist, and I've been there now about maybe 4 or 5 years, I'd say.
There's no doubt your daughter probably is providing the most knowledge in the house. I'd say 11 years of age, right at the cusp of.
Yeah, it's pretty entertaining, just spending time around her. And also I think it's really interesting because for me, when she was born, that brought up a whole load of stuff that I didn't know was in there for me. So when I say a whole lot of stuff, I mean, again, more questions about, okay, this is what it's like to be a parent now. This is what it's like to be a dad. This is the responsibility. Oh, where did that protector mode come from? Or, how am I suddenly become so sensitive in other areas? And then, this different kind of love that I hadn't felt before as well that you have for a child. So it really opened up a whole other avenue when it comes to sort of, again, what it means to be human.
Yeah.
And I think now when I sort of spend time with her again, watching the development, watching the progression, seeing what she internalizes, seeing how she responds now because she's watching mum and dad. She's watching, when you think about it, we often wonder about what we base our relationships on, our intimate relationships on. But the first relationship you see is the relationship of your parents or your caregivers. And that's what you usually base it on. How do you when you see mum and dad, for example, in this particular example, how does dad treat mum? How does mum treat dad? What happens with them in conflict? What do they do with it? Do they ignore each other? Do they do silences? They're shouting matches. So the early childhood years are so important for that developing of ourselves, but also developing our ideas about what it means to be in relationship with another person. Because when it comes down to it, everything is relationship. Everything is relationship. Relationship to our partner, our family, our friends, our colleagues, our peers, but also to our food, our sports, our hobbies, our interests. We have a relationship to everything. And quite often the most important relationship, in my view, that gets missed is the relationship with the self. And of course, as a psychotherapist, you're spending a lot of time with people who are usually suffering. Usually there's anxiety, usually there's depression, usually there's many other things that has brought them to psychotherapy in the first place. So being around that environment can also be very triggering. And this is where I would often rely on sources such as, say, I have a supervisor. All psychotherapists should have a supervisor. So you kind of run through, this is what's happening at the moment with a particular client. But I think equally as importantly is I often check in with my own psychotherapist. So I was back with my psychotherapist about 3 months ago. I just came across a difficulty in life and I couldn't make sense of it myself. Something was happening for me. I was experiencing overwhelm, but I couldn't work out what was going on. So I needed that space to be heard and to be seen by someone that doesn't, know or judge, and someone who doesn't, rush to give me the solution about what it is that I need to do to fix myself. Because in psychotherapy, the type of psychotherapy that I practice is you're trying to help a client come to that themselves. It's like it's a learning process for the client. It's them learning how to be with themselves, learning how to regulate their emotions, learning what it means, like how they experience distress, learning how they experience grief or sadness and what they do with those things. The whole process is exploration, self-exploration. I think is a good way of describing it.
Yeah, I'm really excited getting into the detail around that. I think if we take where you are now as your finishing line, even though you've got a long way to go, if we go right back to the very start, you are one of 4 brothers. What was life like for you growing up?
Yeah, one of 4 brothers. So I'm second. There's 4 boys, and I went to an all-boys school for 12 years. So there a lot of males in my life from early on. Life was okay growing up. Again, I was reflecting on this recently, and I was thinking about what the kind of experiences and expectations and pressures were around that time, and so much of it revolved around school. So much of it revolved around education and what you're going to be. Everything is very much future focused. And I think, again, we get, context is so important for everything. And again, the context around that time and the culture was, you go to school, you do well in school, you do well in your exams, and with that you will go to college then and you'll exceed there and do well, and then you'll get into a job and you'll stay there for good. And that was a real expectation at the time. And it's really interesting. One of the things I remember really clearly at the time was I remember seeing a guidance counsellor I was sort of discussing, what my options were for this big form, the CAO, that form that we have to write down, the 10 colleges we want to go to. I couldn't even pick one at 16, 17 years of age to be able to make a decision about what you want to commit the next 50 years of life to when you're still a child. So I was told at that time, I so clearly remember this, where he said, look, you can go to this college, go to this college, go to this college. If you don't get into college, then you can just do a trade, which I thought was really interesting. That time that the trades were almost like, if A and B doesn't happen and work out successfully for you, you can always do a trade. You'll be grand. And looking at it now, trade's a phenomenal thing to be, isn't it? Absolutely. It's funny how it shifts, Again, just the focus was academic, what can you learn and regurgitate well in an exam, and then which will provide you the into a college or whatever. So,
my lasting memory of you from knowing you when you were younger was very smart, to the point that you studied pure maths in Trinity when you first came out of school, which is an incredibly hard degree to get into. It's for a very particular individual who's got a particular way of looking at numbers. It was a strength of yours. That didn't last too long, is that right?
That's a pretty good statement you just said there. That didn't last too long. I think that describes pretty much 15 years of my life, I'd say, of trying things and just not doing it. And, one of my brothers used to joke a lot about me kind of, just heading along the motorway and then taking a left down a particular avenue and then, it's a cul-de-sac and coming back out and trying another one. I just kept trying things and not working out and always trying to find what it was I wanted to do or what I was passionate about. I didn't find that until much later on. So when I left school, I was okay in school academically, and when I put the head down, I would do well. I just wasn't always interested, but the pressure was there from society and from school and from home to exceed and to do well. So I did. So I got into UCD and I did arts. I think I got 20 points in the old system. It's probably about 400 now. Yeah. Maybe the system's changed again. I'm not sure. It got me into UCD, did arts, and I chose honours maths and statistics because I loved that idea of there's an answer, black and white, no grey area. And the third subject I picked was psychology, which I failed. So I thought that was really interesting, and here I am.
But even mentioning the black and white element, your life is just in the grey, is it?
Now it really is. How it's turned on its head so much. Yeah. I was always somebody who I needed an answer. I couldn't wait. I needed to know, what is the answer? What's going to happen? I didn't like this uncertainty. Uncertainty meant anxiety, fearful about what may or may not happen. And I didn't like being in that space. It wasn't comfortable for me. So I don't think it's comfortable for many people, but particularly I noticed that it wasn't okay for me. Then I left the country and moved to London, and I worked in a bar for a year and a half. I ran a bar in London in Kentish Town with a friend of mine, and that was a great experience, but not great for the health, but a lot of fun.
Kentish Town is a rough enough old place as well.
Kentish Town, we had pretty interesting clientele for sure. There were challenging moments, but outweighed by the fun.
But even, we know where you are now, and we'll talk about that in detail. But unbeknownst to you, you're probably dealing a lot at trying to communicate with people who are very tough to break down because they either would have had drugs or alcohol or rage or something, a barrier, and you being somebody who's working in a bar and you're seeing, things develop that you're going to have to get rid of somebody from the bar. I mean, unbeknownst, you're nearly negotiating with those people from early on.
One of the real strong traits that I always had growing up was a good ability to get on with people. I found it very easy to join in a particular group and gel with them. I think that was one of my strengths growing up, was sort of people skills. And I was curious about that afterwards, because this whole process of psychotherapy and studying and becoming a psychologist has got me to do a lot of reflection and reflect back. And I realized that actually that was pretty clever, because what I was doing was I was making sure I was accepted by people, a form of people pleasing, if you like, meeting somebody new, finding out what do I need to do to get that person to validate me, to think I'm okay, to speak highly of me, because then my self-esteem will be brought up, then I'll feel okay. So I was always looking out to feel better within. I was always looking to other people to validate my experience, to validate me from very, very early on.
And then you came back from London and you settled back here in Dublin.
Came back from London, and then I sort of just started doing a few jobs for friends of the family, and some of those jobs happened to be painting. So as in painting houses, and I became a painting contractor. Very quickly after that, I just set up my own business and I realised I like this. I like this idea of working for myself and having this type of freedom and motivation then too, because this was for me exclusively. It wasn't for somebody else. So I really enjoyed it, and I got in and I did it for 15 years, I would say, in total, yeah. So, but it was after maybe, I think, 3 or 4 years after starting the painting, that's when I first went to therapy.
Why did you originally go? Were you looking for answers, or were you looking to fix problems?
This really caught me off guard because I didn't see this one coming. This whole process of starting therapy. I had just met my now wife, Sarah, and I was with her for probably 3-4 weeks maybe. We were just sort of meeting each other a couple of times, dating. And what I realised was this each time I was with her, it got louder and louder. This sort of, fear was showing up for me. This kind of fear, I felt insecure when I was with her. And had no idea what was happening, no idea what was going on. But I said it to her. Sarah had just come from a process herself of therapy, just before I met her. So what struck me most about her was she was so comfortable with herself. And I had not been with somebody like that before, who was just okay with, I'm doing this is what I want to do. Here are my boundaries. This is me. Take me as I am. And it's what I thought I was nowhere near that. That was the persona I was portraying to other people. But so I felt very vulnerable, very insecure with her, and I brought it up and I said, look, I don't know what's happening, but this is showing up for me, and I really like you. I'm into this relationship. I need to do something. She said, well, why don't you go to therapy? And nobody said that before. I'd never considered.
How old are you, Alan, at this stage?
Now?
No, how old were you when you went to your first therapy session?
When I went to my first therapy session was 33.
At the time, you were
33.
You had a very successful painting career. You were very busy. You're a contractor painter. You met Sarah, who is now your wife, and Ellie now is your daughter. But at the time, even though things were going well in your life, you still felt like you didn't belong, or there was something amiss.
From the outside, and that's a really good point, because from the outside, anybody looking in would say, sure, I was in great form. Last time I saw him, he's healthy, looks well, everything's going, not a bother, super. And that's probably the way I wanted it to be. So I didn't want anybody to think, are you okay? You're not okay? What's happening here? So it was a very new feeling. It's the first time that I felt very, very exposed. It was like somebody put a big spotlight on me when I was experiencing these things. And it's interesting because what I realized afterwards was, I did start therapy then, and I'll speak about that in a minute. But what I realized afterwards when I began the therapy was we started to pull apart what was going on for me, what was showing up for me, that brought me there in the first place. And it was a familiar feeling. It was a familiar feeling that had been showing up in previous intimate relationships. So any previous girlfriends that I'd had up until that point, this was showing up in all of those relationships. And it was actually this idea of not wanting to be rejected, not wanting them to leave me, not wanting the relationship to end. So it was very, very overwhelming. And I'd only just met Sarah. It was a very overwhelming feeling to be in. And I was relying, as I said before, on another person to make me feel okay.
In your line of work now, I'm sure what you experienced, you're now seeing as being quite common, where you have something that's really good and certain people begin to experience that good feeling and they're already thinking, I don't want this to finish. So I'm sure we can talk about it later, where your job is to let people know that if something good is happening, it's because you're enjoying it, you're in the right environment, you can be yourself, all these sort of fine things. But it is interesting because, 33, you go to your first therapy session, and essentially at that stage, am I right in saying that mixed martial arts is part of your life at that stage?
So this is the ninjutsu that that I've been doing. Yeah, that was part of my life then. So I came to that also quite late. I think I started that in 2004. So I was 28 when I started doing that. I had done it before in school and that for a couple of years. We do this kind of Japanese martial art. It's battlefield art, so there's a lot of weapons and stuff. But it's not a sport. It's really very practical and it's very enjoyable. It's really good for me, and it's a great way to sort of be present. A great way to feel what's going on in your body, and great. Just it's a great practice to have. It's a great sort of resource, if you like. So I started that in 2004, and I did it for about 7 or 8 years, and then I opened my own club down in Enniskerry. And a few years after that, I started teaching kids. So now we have a great kids class down there, sort of kids from 6 up until about 12 or 13, I would say.
How many kids are in your class?
So we had to cap it because everyone wants their kids to do martial arts. So we've 25 in the class, and yeah, it's pretty full. It's very rewarding. It's great fun. It's very tiring too.
Fear does not exist. Jojo doesn't know. Sensei. Defeat does not exist. I presume from knowing you, that wouldn't be your style of education.
That wouldn't be the style.
But you're underplaying the journey you went on with mixed martial arts, and I keep referring to it as that, probably because I can't pronounce the word that you said, Nakwando or
ninjutsu, like the ninjas.
But it did take you to Japan.
That's right. Been to Japan 7 or 8 times, I think, over the last sort of few years.
To educate yourself.
Yeah, to attend where the home of it is, that particular art is, and you kind of train, you train a couple of classes every single day for, 7 or 8, 9 days. So it's it's a very intensive and enjoyable 7 or 8 days over there, just to further yourself, to further the knowledge and bring it on. And it's great fun too. You go with all the people you train with from different clubs as well.
And what sort of level did you get to personally?
Oh, it's a good question. So I suppose with this particular art, it can be difficult to quantify levels, because I know a lot of arts use sort of the belt system and that, and I think it's more about progression and change, and being better than you were the previous week is promoted more in this art, which for me is really important, especially when it comes to teaching kids, because there's already enough competition in other things that they're doing. Competition is great. However, I think that for me, the message that goes on, it's a lot about discipline and etiquette and respect, and we'll bring in sometimes about things like bullying and things like that. We'll talk with the kids about that. So it's a lot about letting them know that their best is good enough. Bring their best. That's okay. It's not about trying to be a better, kicker or puncher than the person beside you. It's about being better than you were last week. These kind of messages I feel are very important.
At an early age, you mean that?
At an early age, yeah. When they're in the Olympics, then they can be very competitive, etc., etc. But for now, I think early on, it's good. And we need to incorporate the fun element. The fun needs to be in everything. That's one of the things that was so attractive to me when I started doing this ninjutsu in the first place. The classes were fun too. It wasn't all serious. It was fun. So, because there's pain involved, and you need to be able to laugh a little bit. So it offers a lot. Martial arts offer an awful lot.
It explains a lot, maybe, as to why you have sustained your involvement in that discipline for so long, because judging by you talking about college and school and starting off in banks and insurance jobs, that you didn't necessarily like the idea of levels, that you had to work hard to get to that level, that when you found discipline, that it wasn't about the levels, it was about you and yourself, and you going through your own journey and improving the whole time. Sounds to me like you found, from listening to you, the perfect activity and discipline for you to get stuck into. Hence why you've got this long journey where you're now a sensei. Are you called a sensei in that discipline?
I mean, that's the Japanese. Yeah, that's how they refer to. Yeah, I mean, the kids just Kids just call me Alan, but yeah, you're right. I am. I'm an instructor of a club. So
It's a lot less, I don't know, attractive. Attractive is the right word? And sensei. I'm going to call you sensei from now on. Hope you don't mind.
You should.
I think I will. But it's amazing. You're teaching kids. How many years have you been teaching?
We started the kids in 2015, and then we had to stop for a couple of years then. But we're back into it now, and it's great. It's thriving. Some of them stay for a couple of years, and that's okay, and then they move on. But what I found is that, and this is really important to say as well, is that, again, the emphasis on what's the popular stuff at the moment, what's the popular sports at the moment. And there's a lot of kids that are straight away gone to the football, the rugby, the Gaelic, maybe the tennis, some of the swimming, not always the martial arts. And for some of the parents have spoken to me and said, look, my son or my daughter, they don't like or enjoy these other things. They just never took to them, and I can't, whereas this is the only thing they do enjoy. So even having a club to provide a space for somebody to come into and play is worthwhile having a kids class for.
They're probably enjoying their personal journey,
right,
of exploration, of not feeling that they're being judged at the end of each week or the end of each year with a certificate. It's more a case of what you put into it, you're going to get out of it, and I'm here to support you. I mean, there's something really nice about that. You need competition, but I don't believe you need competition when you're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age. As you mentioned before at the Olympics, if you get very good at a particular thing and you begin to then get into it in more detail, well, then your time will come to be competitive. So maybe a great lesson there that at that young age, it's about just imparting really good skills that they can use in all walks of life.
I agree with you, and there's a great quote that my first therapist said to me, because I've had a few, and I was always comparing myself to other people, and usually comparing to the people who are at the top of their game. Rather than comparing people around my ability, I'd be comparing to the top of the game. And she said, the act of comparison is the act of rejection. And I thought, what does she mean by that? And I went, actually, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if you compare, one is automatically superior or inferior to the other. One is better than or less than. Now, again, back to the Olympics, or, okay, fine, there's a context. But I think early on the message is, let's not compare too quickly. And if we're going to compare, let's compare ourselves to ourselves in the past, last week.
Right. So then, you're into your 30s, and all of a sudden you're like, I want to be involved in psychology. So where do you even begin? Do you just open up your laptop and just put in where can I study psychology? How do you go about turning yourself from the Alan McInerney then into somebody now that's establishing a really credible, great career within psychotherapy?
Yeah. So I think at that time, as soon as I started my therapy journey, which I was in for 10 years, best part of 10 years with a few breaks. But I would say after maybe a year, 18 months, I started really liking the process. Number one, mainly because what I was getting out of it and what changes it was making to me, and because I was beginning to feel contentment the first time in a long, long, long time. But also because it lit a fire in me, actually. It lit a fire because I felt if this is what it's doing for me, then that's the kind of thing I'd like to share this message, and I'd like to do this for somebody. It just felt right. It really resonated with me. So I sort of spoke with my therapist at the time then and said, look, I'm interested in something like this. I don't know if I'd be a therapist, but something like this, what do you recommend? And she gave me really good advice. She said, I think you should do a psychology qualification over a psychotherapy qualification, because she said if you're not sure at the moment exactly which area, you may have a wider psychology might provide you with a wider choice once you're qualified. And that was great advice. So what did I do? Well, as a mature man, I went for the part-time route again, which is basically studying evenings and weekends. I joined with the Open University. We're offering great courses. I took 5 years. So I started in 2010. Studying again, and took 5 years of doing essays and going out to a hotel around Dublin Airport for tutorials once a month, and this commitment of back doing exams, which I didn't like too much, and got my qualification in 2015. Got my honours degree in psychology. So
Outstanding.
yeah, I was really, really happy with that. Really happy with that because it was again calling into UCD and Trinity for a couple of years, but just not being present with them.
Was that the first college course that you completed?
Yes.
So that alone must have been a sense of nearly like relief or weight off the shoulders, that because you were and are an exceptionally smart individual, where we see lots of people who aren't so smart getting college degrees, me being one. But for you to have gone through that journey of self-discovery and then to be able to go back to college when, married pressures of day-to-day house, job, to do it through that, to complete it for somebody who you alluded to it, but you hadn't completed a lot of things in the past. You completed it, you got it done.
Right.
There must have been an amazing sense of accomplishment.
There really was. There really was, yeah. And funnily enough, in the past, I never would have acknowledged any wins that I'd had. Certainly not personally. I'd say to anybody else, that was just my understanding of how things worked. That's what it was like to be me. It was, if somebody else does something well, it's like, wow, fantastic. Look how well you did there. How are you going to celebrate you now? What are you going to do for you after that experience? That was fantastic. What a great effort you put in. All those encouraging, supportive words. But if it was something that I did, I just go, okay, what's next? On to the next thing. No acknowledgement. And again, it was a therapist that pulled me up on that. I'm really glad she did, because I would have done a few essays during that period, and I'd come into her and I'd say, yeah, I just finished an essay this week now, and got through that. And she'd go, excuse me, what did you say? I said, we just finished an essay and got through it. She goes, fantastic, well done. And I found that really hard to hear. It made me uncomfortable, She kind of really stuck with it. She wouldn't let it go either, which was great. I needed that. Yeah, she was there, fantastic, well done. And I felt a bit of pressure. I was like, oh, this feels uncomfortable. But she helped me to acknowledge that, yeah, I did well. And she actually got me to develop a really, really important habit, which is doing something for yourself. We don't do things enough for ourselves. We suggest that other people do it, but we rarely do it for ourselves. So one of the things she got me to do was, she said, what do you like doing? I said, well, I like going to the cinema. I rarely go. She goes, okay, maybe that's something you can do for yourself now, to celebrate doing so well in the essay. And I was resistant to it. This just didn't feel right, Oh, I'm taking a half day off work to go to the cinema because I did well in an essay. Even saying it now, it kind of brings up that like, oof. But she was right. She was right.
Do you remember what movie you saw?
No, I don't. I don't, Greg, because you know what? As soon as I started doing that, I went so many times. So I've actually seen so many movies. Yeah, it became my thing.
Only how people work.
I think it's critical, and the more I'm involved in this work, the more I realize the importance of self-care, and the more I realize how little self-care is practiced. It's a buzzword, and it's used frequently in social media and these things, and looking after yourself, the importance of it. But it's spoken about, but it's not practiced, not in my experience anyway, because it seems so alien for somebody to do. We're not taught that way. But I was taught by my therapist. It took a therapist to point it out to me.
I feel like I'm on the couch here, listening to you. I feel like I'm getting therapy through this, because I've just...
You could be.
A couple of things you're saying there now, and think to myself, geez, yeah, it's interesting. A bit of self-care is important, but it's amazing. Social media, as we all know, is perception's reality. And you've people who put up great videos, and you're like, God, you nearly feel... Sometimes when I look at social media, because I need to be a part of that because of what I'm doing at the moment.
Right.
But I'm looking at other people's lives, and I'm like, their life really, is it really that good? You begin to realize that it's just all a show, and I think that affects people. I'm okay with that, because I look at that's a great video, and like you, I'm like, fair play to you. I don't feel any sense of, that's not me. But there's probably people who are looking at that, who are slowly going into an area where they begin to feel very bad about themselves through the use of social media.
Right.
Like, why don't I have that? Oh my God, look at their husband, or look at their wife. Oh my God, look at their holiday. Oh my God, they're staying in a beautiful hotel, and I can't afford a holiday this year. Oh my God. And it puts a strain on people, doesn't it?
Social media has a huge amount to offer It's a platform certainly for getting valuable information out there, the likes of podcasts and things. Absolutely, it's critical, and it's a great way of educating people. The flip side, of course, is that it's hard to know what's true and what's not.
Yeah.
And I suppose, so many people are watching and listening to, say, podcasts, say this, for example, and it's important for me to be clear as well that everything that I'm saying here today and sharing is my experience of events and my opinion. It's not the one size fits all. This is what you need to do. But unfortunately, that's what I'm picking up on a lot of social media now, is that there are videos out there where people are saying, okay, this is it. Fasting is the way forward. This is what you need to do to achieve contentment, get the body of your dream, and all these things. And then it's something else the next week, and something else, and it keeps changing. Of course, there's benefits to all of the things that they're talking about. I'm talking about things like saunas, cold plunges, breath work, meditation, mindfulness, exercise, diet, sleep. Of course, all of those things are important. But they're sold as, I have this is what you need to do. This is the thing you need to do. This thing, and that actually puts an awful lot of pressure on people, because I listen and to a lot of these recommendations, suggestions for people, and I try a lot of them as well. But here's the thing: you almost need to have no job to be able to do them all of a day. It puts actually more pressure on.
Expense.
And expense too. The mistake is that it is not one size fits all. It never has been. In my experience with clients, I can never make any assumptions about what's going to work for them. We have to come to that together. It's a collaborative process. It's not me saying, it's not the medical model where someone sits down, doctor, and says, I'm having anxiety on these days and I have conflict in my interpersonal relationships. What do I need to do? That's not what happens. I will always redirect back and go, okay, I wonder what's happening for you. What happens in that environment? Why is that causing you? And where do you feel that in the body? It's getting people to sort of connect with what's going on for them. Yeah. Whereas we always look outside for the answer. We always look to the videos and the information, and that's not the right place to look. There's only one place to look, and that's to start looking inside. And, again, something that I often say to clients, pretty much every client, is there's only one expert in the room on you, and that's you. I'm just here to work with you and to hopefully to guide you into how we access that information, how we make sense of it, so that once we have all the information, it doesn't mean that we're not going to experience anxiety or low mood or whatever it is, whatever ailments they have. Again, it means that when those things show up again, they may not be as loud next time. We may be able to handle them better next time. We may have learned tools and strategies to cope and to manage. We may become better at recognizing when they're about to show up, and we can remove ourselves from a situation. We may learn to put boundaries in our life. Boundaries was a new concept I'd never even thought of before I entered into this sort of personal development and therapy. This idea that no is a complete sentence. I love that phrase. Because we're all just trying so hard sometimes to keep everybody else. Is everyone else okay? Am I doing enough for them? Are they happy? Are they going to think badly of me? I better look out for them. And each time we do that, we push ourselves to the side.
They say, my previous life as a school teacher, they say that you teach the way that you would have liked to have been taught. Mm-hmm. And for me, teachers that had a big impact in my life were teachers that connected with me. The book was number 2. It was right, look, here's a student. How can I get him engaged? Mm. And I now look back at the career that I've gone on, I look back at those teachers and think, God, you were so special and you were so important to my life. Mm. And you have other teachers who read a book at the top of the class. The class starts. It's like, what page are we on? 139. Okay, let's start reading, and you read. Off you go. Mm. And when I used to go into those classes, I had no interest in education. So to have that relationship with yourself and your understanding of your true self, like you discuss, it allows you to excel. It allows you to go on a journey that can produce so much more satisfying moments. Mm. But we see that as a young kid all the time without even realizing it, that we're sometimes suppressed because of how we're being communicated to. And it goes on to my question as to, I suppose we'll begin by saying, what is the difference between psychotherapy and psychology? Or is there a difference?
And there's counselling too, right? And then there's psychiatrists, so there's a few of them. And I do get asked this question a lot. So the counsellor will be somebody who will provide help and support to somebody, maybe have help someone develop coping mechanisms and strategies with whatever they come in and present. They don't tend to go too deep into what's happening with the person. That's the next stage. That's psychotherapy. So psychotherapists will be trained to consider all the theories about human motivation and human development and drives, and theories about what change looks like, how do we process change, how do humans experience change. So we have all the theories and be able to hopefully apply the suitable one to whatever the client's needs are in front of you. Next step up from that then is psychologist. Psychologist then would be, I'm going to say, more sciencey trained. So the degree I did was Bachelor of Science in Psychology. So it's about the behaviour then, understanding behaviours, understanding cognitive processes. Psychologists, because as you know, there's a whole host of different ones: sports, educational, clinical, counselling, forensics. Psychologists then also can diagnose. So they'd be frequently calling on DSM. That's a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. It's the go-to for any disorder, any mental disorder.
Right?
No, they can't.
Okay.
Psychologists can diagnose and recommend, potentially, go and see a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists can prescribe, because psychiatrist has the medical, Okay. So they will prescribe the drugs and the diagnose as well. But the psychologist then will, and again, not all psychologists can provide psychotherapy. You need to be trained in that. So there are psychologists out there who would not be psychotherapists as well. It's a separate training. Just because you're a psychologist, you're not automatically a psychotherapist.
And if I was a parent now who has a kid, whether they were 5 or whether they were 15 or even up to 20, are there any tells that could help a parent to realize what the best course of action might be if they can see certain traits that kids or teenagers have that would indicate they require therapy or require assistance?
Well, that's a great question. So I suppose the short answer there is that's a vast area of possibilities of what symptoms would be showing up, would require concern. What would the child be doing?
Is it intuitive then between a parent and a child, or? Yeah.
So a lot of this would. So I suppose support is the best answer here. Okay, because it's a lot to on a parent to be able to recognise it, to know what's going on all the time. It's hard for us to know. We don't always know. We make assumptions and go, well, it could be this, potentially that. My friend was talking to me the other day and they said their child had this. It could be that too. So there's a whole load of things. I think the first thing to do in that case is always kind of with the GP is to go somewhere and say, look, we're concerned about these particular behaviours there, and they may give you a referral then to take it further if they think actually, this looks like something. This is usually how this would present. It could be a developmental disorder. It could be, a whole host of things. There's a long list. So I think GP is always the first step. Always asking for more. The internet's a dangerous place when it comes to mental well-being, because if you inquire or look into certain things like, depressive disorders, and and inquires as to a list of symptoms and things, a lot of them may resonate with you. You may have experienced things. Yeah, I know I have. I look at things and I go, low mood, spending time alone. I go, oh my goodness, have I got this? So it's dangerous when you can fall in very easily to meeting a lot of different symptoms and a lot of different disorders. It doesn't mean you have it, right? So parents need to be really careful about what they do if they have any concerns. And my recommendation would always be, you need to talk to somebody who does know. And it usually starts with the GP, because they'll be able to recommend you on to the professional that'll answer those questions. And that's usually a psychologist.
Yeah, it's a stress and a strain, I think, for all ages. But if you're a father or a mother of a teenage boy or a girl who's going through their journey and they have access to the likes of social media and WhatsApp, and bullying now is like silent and it's deadly and it's behind a keyboard, and it's very different than bullying that might have happened in my day where it was visible. Certainly in a boys' school, it's visible. You could say, well, he's getting a tough time at the moment. You don't see that now. And it's very hard for parents if they both work or life gets in the way, and all of a sudden they can have a son or a daughter at home.
Right.
I'm always concerned about the state of what they're going through. And that's why for you now coming in here, as hard as it is to answer it, how could we talk about an area that might support the parent at home who might be going through a tough time at the moment? They can't connect, they can't communicate, and they're worried about their son or daughter. Is there something you could impart?
I mean, we're back to support again here, because so often for me you're right about the bullying and how scary that's become, because before phones there was, as you said, it was more visible, and at least there was a safe place. So if bullying was happening in school, for example, your safe place may have been home. Hopefully your safe place was home. That may not have been safe either. That's an assumption I'm making, but it at least that bullying ended it when school ended. Now you could be caught anywhere, any time of the day and night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It is, and it is scary. And this is where education comes in for the kids around, what's okay use of the screens and putting in these boundaries around screen time. This is really important. It's not saying that kids can't go on screens. However, what's it like for us to monitor what they're going on? Again, that's difficult. It's difficult when they have phones. They have so much access to the world from their phones. So straight away, it is a new danger. There's no doubt about it. I think, for me, communication is one of the most important things that we can do for kids. Some of my clients are adolescents, and, they're struggling. And a lot of adolescents, there's a lot around self-harm, a lot around suicide ideation, and it's scary stuff. Because for a lot of them, they're holding this themselves. And as much as parents will try, often the kids don't want to share that. So it's a lot for them to have to hold. The communication is really critical, though, because this is something that's often missed. When I say communication, people, they think, oh, just like talking, was that communicating? Communicating is more about letting someone know what's going on for you. So in other words, it's using I words. I'm experiencing it at the moment. I feel like this. That happened the other day. I wasn't okay with it. I, not you, right? Always I, letting someone else know what your needs and your wants are. Once the you starts, the pointing starts, then it's something else and we're into defense mode. So communication it's really hard to do, but it's a phenomenal place to start with any relationship, intimate, kids, whatever. Because there's no aggression. So if I say to you, we're sitting here and I go, Greg, I'm feeling a little bit shut off at the moment from you. I don't know what's happening, but something about you at the moment. I'm feeling really shut off, and I'm feeling a bit pushed back by the way you're being. I don't know what it is, but I just wanted to let you know that. I mean, what did you feel like there when I said that to you?
I felt it was very direct.
Okay.
So there's no faffing around. It's like I felt it was less confrontational because you're taking ownership of your own actions. It wasn't saying, by the way, you're doing something that's affecting me, because straight away you do go into defense mode, and all of a sudden then it creates arguments that parents are scared of. They don't want to, they love their children. They want to do nothing more than put their arm around them and say, I love you so much more than anything in the world. But because of that communication, it's a brilliant point, Alan, because of that communication breakdown, they then distance themselves to the point where there's resentment, particularly from, more than likely, the younger of the two. More than likely, because maybe that maturity or whatever it might be, or they don't see the bigger picture, where the parent, once you're a parent, you realize, Jesus, my parents were incredible dealing with me. From the start of this conversation with you, it's very clear that communication is the center point of essentially what you do day in, day out.
It really is. You see, I think, again, in my experience, so my experience is, actually the best experience I've had that's contributed to me being a psychotherapist that I am is the 10 years that I spent in the client's chair. That's what's brought me, that's what's sort of highlighted the importance of, I've been at the end of a couple of different therapists and what it's like to be there, what the conditions were like that enabled me to say out loud, I'm struggling. This is what's going on for me. I feel vulnerable in this situation, to be able to say stuff out loud that I wouldn't say to anybody else, and to feel that release from doing that, releasing the body, the load gets lighter, that weight that was on the shoulders is gone, that anxiety that was there was gone, not forever, but it's gone for that moment, and it may last a few days, and maybe the anxiety shows up again, you go, okay, but you become better. You become better at naming it then. A lot of the issues these days is that people are not feeling their feelings.
What do you mean by that?
Context might not allow, right? So we might be in a situation and somebody might say something to us and it might upset us, or inside we're kind of going, oh, we find it quite triggering that it might remind us of an earlier, I don't know, something that we feel where we were shamed in the past or something, and something similar might happen and our reaction might be overwhelmed with anxiety, or we might feel furious with anger, but it's not appropriate at this time. We're in a meeting, we're in a business meeting, we can't let this out, so we just push that down. But instead of later on sitting down with a pen and paper or going to talk with a therapist or whatever that is and making sense of that and letting that come out, most of us just walk around with that still in our body. I mean, it doesn't go anywhere, right? Unexpressed stuff stays within. What happens is we start to do that a lot, and we just pile on. And over time, all this unexpressed emotion will show up. Sometimes people explode, after a month or a couple of months, they'll explode, and for something that happens, and their response is completely, disproportionate to what's just happened. So clearly it's a build-up of something else. Other people may get ill, may get sick, may get migraines, may get sore body parts. It shows up in different ways. Feeling sick, nervous. So feeling the feelings is really important. And it's just not done. It's not done a lot. Now, it can be quite a simple thing to do, incidentally, feeling your feelings. It's acknowledging your feelings to yourself. It doesn't mean you have to openly cry in front of somebody or start throwing furniture out the window. It's not that kind of release. But I remember my second therapist said to me at one stage, because I was working my way through, I had a lot of anger around certain things, and she was helping me with that. And she said, have you got a punch bag? So I gave it a go, and it was really good, really helped me. I might have tried that and it might not have worked. That's okay. It was just a suggestion. Rather
than going to the extreme where it's like, right, there's somebody who hopefully has listened to this, who's taking on board some information and they're resonating with it. They might necessarily be at breaking point, but they're also, and they don't feel they don't need to go and see a therapist. It's not great, but I don't need to go and see a therapist.
Yeah.
Are there any coping mechanisms that you would suggest for them that they could start right now that might make them even sleep better tonight after they've listened to this?
Yeah. I think for me, the number one still for me is journaling. Journaling can be many different things. When I did it, and I did it for a few years, it was to name what feelings I was having at that time. So I would have a journal, and I may have had something happen during that day, or maybe going through a period of a couple of weeks where I was feeling low mood or something and couldn't get motivated. I was just having difficulties. And like you said, I didn't want to say, I think I'm going to make an appointment with a therapist now, because that is a big step. That's a huge step. And I'll come back to that in a second. But so journaling is very powerful. And it could be as simple as, I felt so sad today, such and such happened, or I met this person and blah, blah, blah.
What's the science behind the journaling? Is it to get it out?
To get it out.
And could somebody use a voice note? Can they take voice notes? Does that have the same effect?
Absolutely it is. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Some people don't like writing.
Some people don't like writing.
It's too much trouble. It's like, I'm not going down and sit. I can't even write. My writing's messy.
That's a really good point. Someone said, I suggested journaling I always do to clients. By the way, it's one of the many things I suggest. I don't just suggest it.
Yeah, of course.
But it's the one that worked best for me and resonated best for me. So everyone has a phone now. So the pen and paper seems to be old-fashioned now. So people write into their phone. They often come into therapy and they go, hang on a second, they pull out their phone and they read out the notes they've written that week.
Okay.
And as you said, voice notes, 100%, whatever works. So I'm saying journaling. Again, there's a whole load of different ways of interpreting that.
But the science behind it, Alan, is first and foremost, be able to write down what you're feeling.
The thing is, the process of doing it will help you name what the feeling is, because you don't automatically know what the feeling is until you start the writing, until you start talking. Then it becomes clearer. This is the difficulty for so many people now, is they come in and go, I feel so low mood, I can't get motivated, I can't leave the house, I don't want to, and work is so difficult, everything seems like a chore, but they don't know why. They have no idea.
So the what, the how, and the why in your sphere, the why is probably the most important.
They're all important. For me, the why helps because I think for the first step in any process is awareness. For us to make sense of something. So if somebody is experiencing something a certain way and they want to change that, first of all, they have to be aware of what's happening. They have to understand the process before you can make any change, right? Because it's hard to stop something if you don't know what it is or why it's happening. So in psychotherapy, there's this idea that you're doing two things at once. One is we're tending to the immediate, which is what are the things I can do right now in this room and when I leave this room, coping mechanisms and strategies that will help me to manage this overwhelm, to manage this uncertainty in my life. Straight away, what's the thing I can do? And the second thing that we're doing is we're going, okay, we're thinking about the why, because the likelihood is you can cope and manage, but the bigger picture is you want to try and get a little bit underneath it so that you can reduce the frequency over time. It's the sort of, I like this idea of lowering the volume, right? Because there's no switches in the head. You can't flick a switch and say, I used to talk to myself that way, I'm going to stop doing that now. That doesn't happen, not in my experience. So these powerful sort of narrative within, I refer to it often as my critical voice, might say, I can't believe you did that. We can't shut that off, but we can turn it down. These sort of the way we talk to ourselves, it's very, very powerful. It's really interesting as well. Often we'll speak with clients about their narrative, how they talk to themselves inside, what's the ongoing dialogue, because there is one. If you think for a second about how you speak, you're saying, I think I'm going to head down there today. Actually, no, I'm not going to bother. Last time I went down there today. No, I think I should. It's like a conversation. But sometimes when stuff is happening that we're not too happy about, it might be, I can't believe you did that. You're a complete idiot. And way, way worse profanity. You'd never talk to anybody else that way. But we call ourselves these things all the time. Something doesn't work out, you go, if anybody else said it to you, you'd be like, how dare you speak to me like that? You'd have a response. But why is it okay for us?
And with the pressures now, on so many different scales, but the pressures now on individuals means that more than likely that inner voice becomes more self-doubt, more negative, because there's so much more pressure to compete. Because again, it goes back to things like looking over your garden and seeing a nicer house or seeing a nicer car or seeing, again, on social media, the nicer holidays or the bigger smiles. Because you don't know what goes on behind closed doors half the time. You feel you're competing.
Right.
So I think that's a really, really interesting thing that you talked about, which is number one, the why. You're obviously feeling angry, or you're obviously feeling upset, or your day isn't going the way you want it to. Just express it somehow. Write it. Do voice notes. That's a really good starting point. Alan, if I'm listening to this and I'm like, this guy Alan, I need to talk to him, whereabouts can I find you?
So I'm operating psychotherapy out of Greystones, and I have a website, and I also have stuff on Instagram. I sometimes put videos up there. Just short
Alan
videos.
McInerney on Instagram.
Alan McInerney, psychotherapist. On Instagram, and again, it's look, it's not always possible. I think it's really important to say this, Greg. It's not always possible for people to say, oh, you know what? I'm going to start heading to psychotherapy every week now for a year. because it's costly too. It costs money. There's other options available for people because, you've made the point a few times, and you're right that there may be people that listen to certain things go, how do I go about starting that process or whatever? There's blocks, things that get in the way, and finances is sometimes one of them. So there are other options. There's low-cost services too. You have to look into this, people have to look into themselves. But I initially worked in a therapy centre where there was a low-cost service. And it was great because it meant that people paid sometimes less than half of the price of what it usually is. Then there's so many phone numbers you can ring now. Again, that sort of yourmentalhealth.ie website is fantastic because, you also made a really good point earlier about somebody not necessarily, wanting to go to a GP and say it out loud to a GP. And I'm really glad you said that because it's important to recognize that this is not easy for somebody to acknowledge, first of all, I'm in difficulty here. I'm struggling here and I need some help. But actually they can't ask for help. That might be too much for them, might be too overwhelming. So there are ways, and there are some numbers you can actually text. So you don't even need to, speak, first of all, if that's too much for someone.
It's massively important.
It's very, very important.
People I find now, people are more inclined, if their phone rings and it's somebody they know, just to,
right.
I'm busy, what's up? Or, hey, can we text because I'm on another call or something?
Right.
I noticed that, and even I've done it the odd time. Like you've had a long day and you're at home and somebody's ringing you and you're like, I just don't know if I can stomach a phone call. Just like now my phone is ringing and I will, which it is ringing, and I can then message saying, sorry, I can't talk. How's everything going? What's up?
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to bring you on again.
Sure.
Because I feel probably what you say to most clients at the end of, or maybe you don't, at the end of a session, is I feel like we're only, scratching the surface. But there's such a science behind what you do. There's such an intelligence behind what you do. There's such a targeted approach to be able to deal with an individual the way an individual needs to be targeted, because every individual is different. I think there's so much more to this discussion, and I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us your journey so far and the journey of a psychotherapist, soon to be doctor.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you soon.
Produced by the Melrose Future Company.